Welcome to the Dirt Dude Conversations. My name's Andy Clark and I'm here today with, all the way from Canada, I've got Becky Parker from Ontario, or not, you're formerly of Ontario, you're now in British Columbia. How are you tonight, your time, Becky?
I'm good. How are you, Andy?
Well, thank you. See, in the premise before we even started recording, I'd said I'd mess something up and I've done it in the first 10 seconds, so hopefully we've got that out of the road. So Becky lives, obviously, as I said, in BC with her husband Hunter. Becky has experience and degrees in both science and education, and has also completed a master's in education, which was focusing on best practices for educating the food, agricultural, and environmental sector. I hope I've got that right, Becky.
Yeah.
You've also got experience in the classroom, so you understand the challenges that you can have in this sort of sector, and now working in educating the greater public as well as the youth of today. Becky, just are you able to sort of elaborate a little bit on what your current work role is within British Columbia there?
Yeah, for sure. So I work with the BC Agriculture Council. So we are a council of commodity associations, which means that our members are the dairy farmers, the grain producers, the blueberry council. We have quite a diverse membership, about 30 different members, reflecting the diversity of commodities in British Columbia. And my work with them is all around public trust. So that's obviously something that has been getting increasing awareness and increasing attention in the agriculture sector, is this idea of connecting with a non-farming public and really helping them to understand what it is we do in agriculture and trying to build trust with them. So I'm running a variety of different programs and activities that are really focused on building those connections between farmers and consumers, and really helping farmers to understand how best to tell their story so that the public trusts and understands what we're doing in agriculture.
And what do you feel is the greatest challenge to building that trust with the rest of society, I suppose?
I would say that one of the main challenges is the media. I think by nature, media likes to talk about bad news stories more than they like to talk about good news stories. So if something makes the news or is a headline, it tends more than not to be the negative things. So the examples of the bad actors who aren't following regulations and policies, or the people that are maybe not training their employees on how to have good animal welfare.
Mm.
So that's a big challenge, because once somebody hears something negative, I forget what the stat is, but you basically have to provide 6 to 7 different positive stories to try and counteract that negative. So that's what we try and do. We try and keep the conversation positive, but that's definitely a challenge, is that the media portrays negative more than not.
And it's also the story of the story told first is often the one taken as fact. So whether or not something is 100% correct, it's very hard to change the narrative once that's been set, I suppose.
Yeah, for sure.
Now, you're also a 2015 Nuffield Scholar, and so your topic of your scholarship was focusing on attracting and inspiring Generation Z to the agricultural sector. So in some ways, it's still about storytelling in some way, I guess. So it's, I guess just to start with, can you give me a definition of what Generation Z is? and what we'd expect to have as some of the defining characteristics as when they start to enter the workforce.
Yeah, so it changes. I think everybody has a little bit different definition of Generation Z, and as a millennial, I know that that definition gets a little bit of fuzzy edges as well. But what I would suggest that people visualize Generation Z as is, right now it's kind of currently the students that are in like mid elementary school, so grade 4, 5, 6 kind of would be the youngest, right up to those students and youth that have probably finished high school, college, and are maybe just entering the workforce. So it really can be a diverse and varied definition, but I would consider them right now youth under the age of 25.
Okay, and so obviously that's a very broad range of age bracket. Compared to previous generations of the descriptors that have been given, how do you think this Generation Z will change in terms of what they'd be looking for a career, or what do you think would motivate them?
So some of the research that I looked at when I was doing my Nuffield, before I got started into my travel, really showed that, again, it is a diverse audience, but technology is a big driver. So these are people that have lived their entire life with the internet at their disposal. Most of them have had smartphones for longer than some adults have. And so technology is definitely a big driver. I would say also that with that technology, the idea of different expectations around what a workplace can be. So a lot of them envision things like virtual workplaces, or opportunities for entrepreneurship that can be carried out online. And obviously that's a challenge for those of us that are looking to hire people. So I would say those are two of the big ones. And then, they're really looking for something that drives their passions and aligns with what's important to them. I wouldn't say that that's much different than previous generations, but I just think it tends to be a focus for youth today.
So it almost seems like what you're doing now in BC, where you're educating the broader public, would lead into that quite significantly, because it almost seems like you've got to be able to build a passion for this generation before they're almost entering the workforce. So is that how you'd see it?
Yeah, for sure. And it's interesting because prior to working for the BC Agriculture Council, and when I did my Nuffield, I was working with agriculture in the classroom. And yeah, very much thinking about that idea of, if we give them information and make sure that we present agriculture careers as an exciting option, that should be enough to really drive people to that kind of a career. But what I've learned in the work that I'm doing now, and that idea of building trust, is the importance of connecting on those values-based pieces it's just so huge. And, that's some of the communication that I've been working on, is trying to get farmers to talk about, well, what are your values around caring for the environment? What are your values around caring for animals? Your values around providing healthy food for your family and for other people's families. And interestingly enough, when you ask youth, is it important for the company you work for to have the same values as you? My experience has shown, and some of the research that I've done has shown that over 9 in 10 of youth say, yeah, values that align with mine that's what I'm looking for in a company that I want to work for. So my takeaway from that is those corporate sustainability statements and kind of those core values that companies highlight. Gen Z is looking at those, and they matter to them.
And so that's from a corporate perspective. If you're looking at it from an industry perspective, so trying to get them into an industry rather than just a business, how do you go about attracting them to those sorts of to that broader idea and perspective, I suppose?
I think that there are definitely still same kind of approach. So I mentioned a few shared values earlier, but again, that idea of caring for the environment. Agriculture, I think, can do an amazing job of telling the story of how that is important to us and how that is a value that we are striving for. Obviously, again, there's a lot of bad news stories around the impact of agriculture on climate change, but I think we can do a better job as an industry to give concrete examples of practices that we use to minimize our impact on climate change, or the things that we do to protect water quality and different species in the ecosystem. And that all comes back to, again, that kind of a value, that shared value of caring for the environment. So that's one example. And then, around values of things like animal welfare, caring for people. How do you care for the people that work in the industry and the people that really make this industry run? Those are all things that we can, again, tell stories about from that farmer perspective as well as from a corporate perspective.
What do you think is more important, I suppose? Do you think it's more about having something tactile, and whether it's a farmer or a manager or something like that, and a face behind telling these stories? Or do you think it's just about getting content and mission statements and things like that? What do you think is going to give greater connection?
It's a good question. I think you can't have one without the other, but having an authentic person who's able to be a charismatic face and tell a genuine story, I think that makes a big difference. And obviously that spokesperson can sometimes be hard to identify. One of the things I pointed out in my Nuffield research was that if we're looking to attract youth, that maybe some of the people we should use as spokespeople should be on the younger age range, so that a teenager, for example, in high school can look at that and see, almost like resonate with them and see themselves in that person, as opposed to, somebody like my dad who's retired and just seems so far out of the spectrum of what that person's reality is.
Oh, don't worry, I've got an 8-year-old, and he asked me what it was like in the olden days. So it's always a different perspective on what defines age and the like. Yeah, I mean, look, I think you're right. Having that authentic story is probably the best thing. And I know within your report you mentioned a lot about mentors and ambassadors. So I guess that's partly why I asked that question. I know you've also mentioned they're quite competitive and they like problem solving. So what are some of the ideas or things that you've come across that could be used to attract them into an agricultural industry with that?
Yeah, so I think that idea of competition, that was something that I saw when I was in New Zealand. The New Zealand Young Farmers have a great example of a competition-based event where the students actually go rotate through different stations and have a chance to do a hands-on activity that relates to a different type of job. So they might at one station do a marketing activity, at the next they might do like a weed identification activity. At another, they might have to be doing some math to calculate kind of what it would be like to be somebody working in agriculture finance. And so having those hands-on activities is great, but what really got the students engaged was that they were working in teams and they were competing for points and to be able to win that competition at the end of it. So I think those kinds of activities are a great example, and it makes sense, right? When you look at the reality TV that's out there, like Big Brother and Dancing with the Stars and all those other ones, the cooking shows, they're all competition based. So that it's something that I think just as humans we love to have that idea of competing for something. So why not combine that with agriculture career education?
That's a great idea, and it has, like you say, it draws that engagement. Plus, you probably have that, the adrenal rush that goes with it. And I'm not sure, I'm no psychiatrist or biochemist, but it's one of the endorphins or dopamine or one of those things that it gives you that feel good response at the end of it. I mean, that's why a lot of us play sport and do the like as well. So you have that competition that drives you on and keeps you motivated, I suppose.
Yeah, okay.
I know New Zealand are really good at that, actually. I think from a wine industry perspective, they've actually got the Young Viticulturalist Awards, and it's a similar sort of thing, although it's for an individual, whereby I guess it works off having that theoretical training as well as the practical training to come out with who's the most rounded individual at the end of it. So they're innovative, the Kiwis. You've got to give that to them.
Yeah, for sure. And it's one of those things where that's what I loved about the Nuffield is finding all these examples of best practices around the world. And then what was great about that one was when I was working for agriculture in the classroom, I had the opportunity to replicate that and do the same kind of competition-based activity in both Ontario, and then also create something for a national level. So it's awesome when we can rip off and duplicate and give credit to other people, but using things that we know work.
Well, that's innovation. It's not about necessarily inventing something or creating it. It's about taking it from where it sits over here to being in a completely different sort of sphere, but you're trying to replicate the same results in some ways or improve them. So how did you, what were the outcomes when you did it yourself in Canada?
They were really good. We saw really good, we did pre and post surveys and found that students had increased awareness of what some of those career opportunities were. They had an increased interest in those career opportunities. Obviously, it's hard to track anything longitudinally and know whether those students actually went into programs that were pursuing careers in agriculture. But in terms of kind of those first level steps of increasing exposure and increasing engagement with them, I feel like it did a good job.
Yeah, good. I know you mentioned technology before, and that obviously Gen Z have been immersed in technology their entire life. Agriculture, I guess, probably has a perception of having perhaps not the greatest technological advances. not to say that that's true or correct, but when it comes to managing perception, what do you think would be the best way to actually show that, ag tech's a massive sort of deal nowadays?
I mean, I think just, again, highlighting those stories and giving those examples. It's amazing when you provide examples that students can relate to. If you start talking about a robotic milker, that they don't necessarily understand what that is right away. But if you show them a picture of a drone and ask them, well, how many of you have a drone, or your friends have a drone? I mean, that's something that they're familiar with. And when you can then say, well, hey, did you know that there's people who, like, it's their job to use these drones, and we use them in agriculture to look at fields and identify pest pressures and things like that. It's something that they can relate to and understand. And it's a concrete example of how we use technology. Another one would be, to talk about, well, have you heard of an engineer? And most people understand the concept of an engineer and building things. But, well, did you know that you can be a mechanical engineer and actually develop innovative equipment that we can use here in the agriculture sector? I've got a great example of that from an individual in Ontario who developed a lagoon crawler, it looks like a Lamborghini, and it floats on top of the liquid manure tank, and then uses air jets to stir up the manure so that the nutrients are evenly distributed before they go and spread it on the field. And the guy who developed it, he was 23 at the time that he developed that, and he's a mechanical engineer. And to share that story and that example with youth, they love it.
Who'd have ever thought a Lamborghini would be stirring up manure?
You have to look it up. It's the company is Nuhn, N-U-H-N. The Nuhn Lagoon Crawler. It's pretty interesting.
Oh, great! Oh, yeah, that's a good plug for the Nuhn Lagoon too. Now, we also, as I mentioned earlier, you spoke about mentors and the like. Who are some of the mentors that you've had in your journey in agriculture and help shape who you are and I guess where you see yourself within ag as well?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'd be remiss if I didn't mention my parents. So I'm a 7th generation farm girl, originally from Ontario. So you weren't wrong when you introduced me. But so I come from a long line of people that have been involved in agriculture, and both my parents, farmed on the side, and they had full-time jobs in agriculture for their entire careers. And I think I was always inspired by their work ethic and their passion for giving back to the industry, being involved in extracurricular activities, being on boards and committees. So that they were definitely, they continue to be mentors for me. And I've been fortunate to have some really great bosses that have been supportive of me, allowed me to do my Nuffield scholarship while I continued to have a full-time job, and really just always pushed me to think of new ways I can grow my skill set and apply my skill set. So I consider myself to be very fortunate, and I think there's no shortage of amazing people that are in the agriculture sector that we can look to for mentors. I'm constantly inspired by people that I haven't even met in person, but I see their Instagram stories and how they approach life or things that they're doing in their farm businesses, and it's easy to be inspired and mentored by a wide variety of people.
It's amazing. We are in a very privileged age to be able to be inspired by people that we don't have a physical or even a speaking connection with. It's we can learn from people through social media in such an amazing way. Becky, I'm going to introduce you now to the cowbell round. So being a farm girl, this is actually what we'd say in Australia, a Ridgy-Didge cowbell from the Savoie region in France. It was given to me by the lovely Bibelet family. Now, the cowbell round is essentially, I'm going to give you a few topics. I want some quick, short, concise answers. If you start to waffle or get off track, the cowbell will be rung. So, here we go. Your own personal leadership style.
I would say I support from the sideline.
Was close. The role of advocates in attracting new talent to the industry.
To inspire and provide authentic stories about working in this industry.
Generation Z's perception of agriculture.
Unknown.
As in you don't know it, or they don't know of agriculture?
I would say they just don't have an understanding of it because they're not really shown it.
Yeah. Your Nuffield experience.
Life-changing.
The role of this is a little bit broader, but the role of government in steering new participants to agriculture.
Supporting organizations that are already doing great work.
Well done, Becky. You made it through. Well done.
That's hard to be concise on some of those.
Oh, no. That's the challenge. Is you got to just condense it down. So I know it's been terrific talking with you this evening, your time. I have a cup of tea. I really hope very shortly you have a glass of your husband Hunter's Pinot in your hand or something like that.
Sounds good.
No, look, thank you so much. It's been great to chat with you again, and all the best in making sure that the social license continues for agricultural producers in BC.
Likewise, and I hope I have a chance to come down to Australia and visit again soon.
Anytime you're welcome. Thanks, Becky.
Thank you, Andy.